Good day, everyone. I hope everyone is well and staying safe during this pandemic. I'm Justin Ryan Onang from BSMT2A, and today I'll be discussing the introduction to women in education, focusing on gender in education and the importance of education from an international perspective. So, before we begin, it is important that we understand the current status of women in the education sector. So, the Philippine Statistics Authority, or PSA, reports the following. In terms of literacy, 68 million or 95.6% of Filipinos aged 10 and over are basically literate. So when we say basically literate, this refers to one's ability to read, write, and do arithmetics. So the basic literacy rate is at 96.1% for women, around 26 million women, and 95.1% for men, or 25 million. In terms of enrollment, approximately 91% of girls and 89% of boys are enrolled in public education, with 80% of girls completing secondary education compared to 70% for boys. In the alternative schooling systems, which include madrasa schools, which are Islamic, they account for 2% of primary school enrollees from 2006 to 2007, with 52.57% of enrollees are female while 47.43% are male. In the indigenous peoples, 86,771 students are enrolled in secondary education, with 53.76% of them of which are female. Lastly, in higher education, the enrollment for women was at 54.48% and 45.52% for men. Education as a vocation or as a career, there is a high or staggering rate with 89.58% of public elementary school teachers and 77.06% of public secondary school teachers are female. So why is this so? We will be explaining why in the next few slides. So the United Nations report, which is the World's Women 2015 Trends in Statistics, reports that women are underrepresented in the STEM fields, which include science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, in tertiary education and postgraduate studies, as well as areas involving physical activity in vocational courses such as mechanical work, manufacturing, and construction. Women make up two-thirds of the 781 million illiterate people aged 15 and over. So we see that from the information presented, how despite women having a higher basic literacy rate and numerical skills compared to men, there are still issues present with discrimination and gender inequality, which we will be discussing in the next few topics. We see that because of culture and societal norms, or what society determines as good, women are influenced to take on lower paying jobs compared to men, and their careers usually revolve around health, education, and their caring and reproductive roles in society, compared to men who are taught from a very young age to pursue careers in science and mathematics. So before we continue, allow me to share this short video about gender stereotypes in education.
As children, there is no limit to what we believe we can become. But as girls and boys, we are steered in different directions growing up. This happens because of what we call gender stereotypes, traditional ideas about what boys and girls can or should do. They may not always be obvious, but stereotypes are everywhere, and they start to follow us from our earliest days in the toy store, and continue to influence us when choosing subjects at school. For instance, girls are expected to be good at arts and humanities, while boys are led towards maths and science. When we come across the same stereotypes again and again, they begin to feel natural and start to shape our preferences and career paths. More men go into better paid jobs in the science, technology, engineering and mathematics field, and women tend to choose teaching and social work professions. Acknowledging gender stereotypes and their consequences is the first step towards breaking the mold, so that we build our lives based on our own choices.
So then what is the importance or what are the benefits of women having the right to a quality education? So first is economic empowerment and alleviate poverty. So education empowers women to become economically independent of men and contribute to the development of the country. And this all begins with proper education and equal opportunities for employment for women. Next, we have improved health. So women become more aware of their importance of health and hygiene. And through health education, women can live a healthier lifestyle and mothers can take better care of themselves and the baby. This maternal health. Next is dignity and honor. So women who are educated, who have successful careers, and have prominent roles in society become inspiration and role models for millions of young girls around the world. Fourth, we have justice. So women become more aware and informed of their rights, leading to a decline in the incidence of violence against women, as well as forced prostitution, child marriage, etc. And last but not the least, choice of profession. Women should have equal opportunities to education, so they may be able to choose their profession, whether they want to become a doctor, an engineer, a chemist, a chef, etc. So before we continue, I'd like to emphasize that education is a right, and it's not just a privilege that is given to a specific gender or to a specific few. And up until the middle of the 19th century, women were educated only for traditional houseworks. However, society is now witnessing changes in the role status of women as there must be more emphasis on equality in quality education for both women and men. Exercising their political, civil, and social rights will empower women in improving their overall conditions in society. So now let's begin with our topic on gender and education. So before we begin, it is important that we have a vocabulary or we understand the important terminologies and definitions in order for us to have a deeper understanding on the topic. So first, what is gender? So based on our previous topics, gender is defined as a socially learned behavior that is usually but not necessarily associated with a person's sex. So just because someone is female doesn't mean that she must act feminine, and just because he is a male doesn't mean that he must act masculine, right? So characteristics of gender include it is a learned behavior, it changes over time, and it varies within a culture or among cultures. So next, what is education? Education, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is the action or process of educating or of being educated. When we say educating, this can be through giving instruction, providing knowledge, explaining a certain phenomenon, or demonstrating a certain skill to students or learners. So education is a basic human right and essential for progress of society and the fulfillment of one's human potential. Furthermore, the right to universal primary education is highlighted as the second Millennium Development Goal of the United Nations. So the Millennium Development Goal, or MDG, are actually 8 international development goals that were that's supposed to be achieved by the year 2015. It was made during the Millennium Summit of the United Nations in 2000. So it highlights the right, everyone should have a right to universal primary education. So the important terms, I highlighted it in yellow so that these are the things to remember as we go along with our report. So lastly, it is also the fourth Sustainable Development Goal, or SDG, by the United Nations. The right for everyone to have a quality education. So it shows that even though the Millennium Development Goal has already ended, that means even until now, it is still a very pressing issue. Education is still a very important issue that we have to tackle in society today. So the SDG are actually a set of 17 interlinked goals that are all aimed in achieving a sustainable future for all, hopefully by the year 2030. So what then is the significance of gender and education? Why do we have to study gender and education? So in order to understand this, we need to have a background. So all boys and girls enjoy the right to education, and many Filipino parents see education as a way out of poverty. Thus, they strive to send their children, regardless of their gender, to school in hopes for a better future. And education is a top agenda or top priority for government and agencies as seen in Philippine laws and policies. So this also includes the Department of Education for secondary and primary education and the CHED, or the Commission on Higher Education, for the tertiary level of education. So Filipino parents send their children to school in hopes for a better future so that they're able to have a source of income, livelihood, to start a family, and to live a comfortable life. So we also see that gender parity has been achieved in primary education in most parts of the world, including the Philippines. So gender parity in the sense that there is a relative equality when it comes to, for example, the ratio of men is to women or boys to girls students in the school setting. So then the question that one ponders on is that if all boys and girls enjoy the right to education, if Filipino parents strive to send their children to school regardless of their gender, if education is a top priority for government and different agencies, and if gender parity has been achieved in primary education in most parts of the world, why do we still need to study gender and education? It is because despite all of this, much still has to be done to achieve gender equality in education. So much still has to be done in order to achieve gender equality, and this will be explained in the next slide. So how does gender influence education? So in order to understand this, we need to have, in order to summarize this, first we begin with knowing that in some countries, people are still fighting for the right to quality education. So this includes in India and Pakistan, there are still women who are fighting for the right to have a quality education. And because of this, we see a need to assess and evaluate the educational system and the quality of education and nature of gendered interactions in educational institutions. Why? Because uh, students are people usually outside of their family are first exposed to educational institutions as their first gendered interactions, especially with people who are close in age or their peers who are close in age to them. Now, this affects them. Why? Because going back to the last slide, many Filipino parents see education as a way out of poverty. Now, what happens when these nature of gendered interactions are discriminatory or biased towards women or towards the LGBTQ community, wherein they are seen as the inferior sex, so or gender? What happens is because of this bullying or physical harassment, maybe these women or LGBTQ community tend to drop out of school, and this lack of education will then lead to the lack of source of income, lack of livelihood, and it then causes them to resort to desperate measures such as prostitution, illegal activities, and the such. So then we understand that after evaluating and assessing the educational system, we see that gender parity does not necessarily equate to gender equality. Just because we achieve gender parity doesn't mean that we already achieved gender equality. So by changing the system, by implementing the right laws, standards, and policies, and achieving gender equality in society, particularly in educational institutions, we see that we can achieve better economic opportunities. There is delayed marriage and reduced fertility, especially for women, because they are now ready to start a family, have a stable career or job. And it also gives them equality, empowerment, and better sexual and reproductive health and rights. So now that we're done understanding what gender is and what education is, and it's now important to move on to the importance of education from an international perspective. So how is education important on a global view or global scale? And what are different laws and policies that were made? So the Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that education is a fundamental right and is necessary to fulfill one's human potential. Primary education is a non-negotiable right as emphasized by the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations, and technical and professional education should be accessible and based on a person's merit and skills, but not necessarily based on one's gender. The 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child sets the civil, political, economic, social, health, and cultural rights of the children, that's seen in the bottom left picture. And on the bottom right picture is the CEDAW, or the Convention on the Elimination on All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which demands for the elimination of discrimination against women, particularly in laws and practices against women in educational institutions. That's our topic right now, is about gender and education. So it's also important to understand how education is used as a tool in socialization. According to Robertson and Dale, educational institution is the only formal institution aside from the family wherein all individuals and societies are required to pass through. So not only are they required to pass through, but usually it is one of the first societal institutions that one enters outside of the family from a very young age when he or she starts studying in school and gets to interact with other people or which may be of the same or different gender as him or her. So we understand that schools now provide culture while shaping the social norms. Why is this? This is because school systems determine who is important, who is worth listening to. They they teach who has which persons of influence, and who should be read in history, as seen in subjects like social studies. We see that in school, students are taught what jobs generate money, or which people have power in the current status and shape of society, and how to become that person. So we see that education is a very powerful tool in socialization, or how people or how boys and girls are going to see tasks and behavior that are related to his or her gender or sex. So then we see that education must now be used as a tool to create a fair and just society. It must reflect the values that a society that one wishes to see. And it must tackle gender issues which include non-sexist curriculum, non-sexist language, freedom and career options, and removal of all forms of discrimination. The Beijing Platform for Action in 1995 is a landmark document for advancing the rights of women and gender equality worldwide, agreed upon by the Fourth World Conference on Women in 1995. So shown here are a picture of the 12 key areas where urgent action was needed in order to ensure greater equality and opportunities for men and women. So I'm going to highlight here education and training for women. Highlighted here because we see that even until today, education, have a right to a quality education for all genders is a very important or pressing issue that we have to tackle today. So under the BPFA, governments and the UN agreed to promote gender mainstreaming as a strategy that ensures gender perspective that is reflected in all policies and programs at all levels, whether regional, national, or international. So because of this, the BPFA had different strategies for women to be able to voice out their agendas and empower them through national plans and policies. So in the Philippines, the BPFA developed discussion on women's rights to include VOW or violence against women, women leadership, and political participation and economic concerns. Because of this, the BPFA was able to connect women's issues with other concerning and pressing societal issues such as environmental, armed conflict, and human rights, while including gender mainstreaming, as I said earlier, to empowered women and their advancement of rights in the country. So there are 6 strategies under the UN Beijing Platform for Action that are related to education, which I'd like to share with all of you. So first is to ensure equal access to education. Second, eradicate illiteracy among women. Third, improve women's access to vocational training, science and technology, and continuing education. Fourth, develop non-discriminatory education and training. Fifth, allocate sufficient resources for and monitor the implementation of educational reforms. And sixth is to promote a lifelong education and learning and training for girls and women. So this is the Beijing Platform for Action 1995. On your left, we have the BPFA plus 25 Philippine Progress Report from 2014 to 2019 by the Philippine Commission on Women, or the PCW. And on the right, we have the UN Women's Guidance Note for the BPFA plus 20 National Review, which marks the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women and the adoption on the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action 1995. So this was made on September 2018. So before I end my discussion, allow me to share an inspirational quote from one of the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in the United States, who is Sonia Sotomayor, and she says that until we get equality in education, we won't have an equal society. So thank you for listening. I hope you learned or gained something about gender, education, and its significance and how we can use education to achieve gender equality in society. And I hope you have a great day ahead. And these are the references that I used for my discussion today. So again, thank you very much and God bless.